my name is Annabel Abbs, and I'm a writer, a mum, a blogger, but also a very keen long distance hiker. And I currently live in London, but I spend quite a bit of time in Sussex, where my mum lives, and where my dad did live. He just died recently. So I've been doing a lot of walking because I think grief and walking sort of seem to go hand in hand. So my latest book is called Windswept. I've been writing it for about 5 years. And basically what happened was I've got a sort of strange history of walking. But I realized that all the books I was reading were all about men walking. And so I'm particularly interested in women who walk long distances and sort of grueling, I call it long distance walking or hiking, or we might call it trekking, I suppose, rather than a stroll in the city. And so I'm also very interested in women who go out into quite remote, I call them sort of unpeopled places where the terrain is often quite hostile. There's often mountains, but also women who follow long river journeys, or women who walk across plains, or as in not aeroplanes, but, very flat sort of desert type landscapes. But I realized that every book I read was pretty much a story of a man. So quite interested in historical women. And it seemed to me that there was a real gap. If you look at the history of walking, it is the history of men walking. And I just thought it was very strange. There seemed to be no women. And I thought, I can't be the only person who likes walking. Of course, now I know there are lots of contemporary women who like to go on distance treks, but it seemed to me that no women in the past had done that. So I started looking around and spending a lot of time in the basements of old libraries and archives and digging up, hundreds and hundreds of women from the past. But I started to see patterns with all these women that at points of crisis or points when they felt lost, I guess some sort of major personal issue in their life, they would just set off. Their accounts were often unpublished. I had to go and sort of drag them out of the bowels of the British Library. They were often unpublished. They were out of print. They were languishing in the bottoms of obscure libraries or in old bookshops. So I started to sort of pull them all together. And so that was where my story began. But also I in the book, I weave through my own history of walking and how it has changed me. That was a very long explanation.
That's what we like. We like long explanations. This is what we're here to do, is to chat and to talk about all things. And just to say, I'm so sorry about the loss of your dad and dealing with that loss. Were you quite a close family growing up? Did you used to go walking with your parents?
I had a very strange childhood. I was brought up in Wales in a very remote village, and neither of my parents could drive. My dad never learnt to drive. We never had a car. So we had to walk everywhere. So walking was very much it was sort of integral to my life, really. Every day we went out walking for a walk, but we also had to walk just merely to get anywhere. So whenever we wanted to go anywhere, we had to walk. But, we were walking, we weren't doing urban walking. We were very much walking in nature. So we were walking through valleys and along the coastline. And for a long period of my childhood, I didn't go to school. So walking was also part of my education. We would, walk somewhere and then we would draw. This is my parents' idea of schooling. We would walk somewhere and then, we would get out our sketchbooks and we would draw. Flowers was my thing. I think I spent most of my primary years sketching flowers. So consequently, I was hopeless at maths and my science was pretty abysmal and had quite a tricky job catching up when I started secondary school. And I was just coming up to the age of 12, and I just could barely add up because I'd spent years just writing poems and drawing pictures of flowers. So looking back now, it was a rather lovely childhood, but at the time it made secondary school quite difficult because they assumed that because I could draw and write, I should be in the top set, and I was always I just couldn't really catch up with the maths because I should really have been in the bottom set. But that was how the schooling was done. The secondary schooling was done back then. But yes, so my dad was a very keen walker, and he would do things like he would hold up traffic with his walking stick, and we would all sort of skip across the road while he shouted "Death to the motor car," and he was very anti-car. So that is sort of that sense of walking in wild places is sort of in my blood, and that sense that a car isn't necessarily a good thing. A car it seems very luxurious to me. Of course, I drive now, but I still would always walk if I can. I only get in the car if I absolutely have to. So walking and nature was there. And although, obviously I live in London now, but, I really get very twitchy. If I haven't seen some greenery, I get quite twitchy after a few days. So that need for greenery. And of course, for a long time, I thought that was just me. But what's been so fascinating in the last 2 decades, really, is the amount of research just pouring out of all of these universities, which shows that, and women in particular, really interesting studies that show that when women walk in nature, our blood pressure drops even more than if we were male. So, of course, walking in nature is great for blood pressure of men and women, and it's great for, reducing stress levels, reducing cortisol in men and women. But the results are always more marked in women. So it's as if either we need it more, or as if we have some sort of, I would almost say, special connection in that we respond to it very, very immediately and quite dramatically. And yet, if you look back historically, women have so often been confined to their homes, to their kitchens, or to wherever their place of work. And, at some stage, I think probably maybe about 400 or 500 years ago, the wild landscapes became the preserve of men. So that was the stage at when men were going out and hunting, shooting, fishing, poaching, scaling peaks, surveying, all the things that they were doing. And women who had obviously up until that point had lived more sort of a more agricultural life, often sort of gardening and in the country. And then you see the Industrial Revolution and everyone moves to the cities. And at that point, women really become particularly trapped within the home or within their workplace, mainly within the home. And landscapes empty out. Everyone moves to cities, and wild landscapes that had once been full of small holdings and small villages and hamlets and small farms suddenly become empty. And at that stage, men seem to sort of move in and take over the landscape for themselves. And suddenly wild places are not deemed safe for women. And this is obviously very topical at the moment. These places are not places of safety, and women are encouraged to stay at home or to stay, to have a garden. And the garden is where you get your contact with nature. And I studied, I was mulling all this. I started to feel quite cross. And I started to find out that this was a bit of a myth. And there are, in fact, a lot of women who took that quite radical decision to step out of their kitchen and to go out back into nature and to do these long, quite reckless in a way, quite reckless hikes. Because what you have to remember is that I'm looking really at women about 100 years ago. They had no GPS, they had no mobile phone, there was no mountain rescue service. The kit they travelled with they walked with was just, you can hardly imagine it now. So I came across accounts of women who would walk just with their things in a basket, or they would stitch themselves up a sort of a sack and carry it over their shoulder in some sort of homemade sack. Quite a lot of women who made their own tents. And then if you actually go, and some of them obviously did use rucksacks, but if you go and pick up a rucksack from the 1920s, it is so heavy. It's solid, it's canvas, it's leather, the buckles are made of brass, it weighs a ton before they've even put anything in it. So they would all the things that we would now have on a little phone, they are packing up. They would take a real book, and they would take often they would travel with, they wanted to draw, so they would take pencils and a sketch pad, and we just have our phone on our camera. So they often walked with weights that were, weights on their back that were sort of weight that, I, for example, would think, oh, no, that's way too heavy. So the more I came across these women, the more impressed I became. And I started sort of collating them. I've got a huge database of them now. Only about 9 or 10 go into the book, and I focus on 6 of these women. And what I did was, when I started getting all these women together, I thought, I'm going to go and do their walks. And at the stage, I was going through a slightly difficult time in that I was, I'd spent a lot of time at home bringing up my 4 kids, and I found that quite, I felt quite confined. I felt quite trapped, actually, for quite a long time. And it sounds very churlish to say, because in some ways, you feel so lucky to have healthy children and to be able to stay at home and look after them. But actually, I'd found it really difficult. Just that sense of, being trapped is the only word I can think of, really, just being trapped all the time. So as they started to grow up, actually, we started making them walk. So we said, right, there are no more holidays. When my youngest was 7, we said there are no more holidays except walking holidays. That is it. You walk, or there's, we stay home and you go to the park again. So they rather grudgingly all agreed that they would come walking, and it transformed our family life. And we're now we're a very close family, and I'm not sure we would have been so close if we had been doing more, perhaps, hanging around by a pool or whatever. There's something about walking day after day after day, 20, 30, 35 kilometers a day. There's something about that rhythm, you just get into this sort of strange, almost meditative state. And if you're walking as a group, you share this experience, not just the experience, obviously, of the sort of slightly meditative, I call it almost a slightly spiritual state, really. But you're just sharing all these experiences. So from the minute you leave, from the minute you start walking at dawn, sometimes everything throughout the whole day is shared in a way that it wouldn't be if we'd gone on one of those, an activity holiday where you all go off and do different things. So we sort of really bonded as a family over the walking. And when I started researching these women and I started going out in their footsteps, I suddenly realized that actually my children had grown up and we were coming to the end of that. And I was sort of looking at a new future. I was looking at a future that didn't, in which I wasn't a mum, that didn't include children. And I thought, I'm going to have to go out walking on my own, just like all these women did. So I plotted out their routes, and I look at Georgia O'Keeffe, the American artist, famous for her huge flowers. I looked at Gwen John, a Welsh artist. I looked at Simone de Beauvoir, a philosopher. I looked at the Scottish writer Nan Shepherd, and then I looked at a couple of other women, the wife of a writer called Frida Lawrence, and I looked also at Emma Gatewood, the long-distance American hiker who came out of a very, very abusive marriage. I think she'd had something like, I can't remember, it was 7 or 8 children and a very horrible abusive marriage. And she just walked out of her house one day, said, I'm going for a walk. And she went off, and she was the first woman to solo hike the Appalachian Trail. So I looked at these women and I looked at the predicament that catapulted them into going on these hikes, because generally, if you go back 100 years, most women didn't just think, right, I'm going to do this trail. It's not like today where, there are thousands of us, thank goodness, thinking I'm going to do this trail. I've got this coming up, and I can take these months out, and we often go for adventure. These women were going because they were propelled into going usually by some sort of emotional turmoil in their lives, because you almost had to have that incentive then, because it wasn't like it is now. There weren't organized trails. A lot of the routes weren't signposted. So it was a very, very different walking experience. And in fact, following in their footsteps, although I was doing it obviously with a mobile phone and a lightweight backpack and everything, following in their footsteps was really interesting, because I kept having to say, okay, they did this walk with no phone. They did this walk. Simone de Beauvoir always quite often walked in espadrilles. For years, she just walked in espadrilles with this basket. So I think, okay, I've got my hiking boots on, my, beautiful, lovely, expensive hiking boots. But, she's doing this in a pair of espadrilles, and they're doing it without bras. They're doing it with coats that aren't waterproof. So I had to keep sort of trying to get into their skin, if you like, so that I could see just what they experienced when they did those walks.
You talked about wanting to do their walks? You know, you found these incredible women who've gone out to do these walks. Tell me more about that experience for you, you know, doing the plotting, doing the planning, figuring out the routes. You know, how did that all work for you? And how did you incorporate your writing? Were you taking, you know, a journal with you so that you could write while you walked? Did you plan that to be part of your day? So you'd start by writing every morning or stop on top of the hills to write?
Yeah, so I always took a journal and or a notebook and kept notes. And I also did actually take a sketch, you know, little sketch pad and a little set of watercolors. So I always tried to do sort of paintings and drawings along the way. I tried to use old maps. So I tried to use the maps they would have used rather than just, you know, looking on my all trails. And I tried also to, you know, I tried to walk at the same time. So if so Gwen John, the Welsh artist, you know, she sets off in August, so I set off in August. So I tried to map the time of year that I was walking to the time of year when they walked. So if they were walking in snow, I was also walking in snow, and if they were walking at autumn, I was always also walking at autumn. Manifesto, really, the second sex, and she talks about. You know, women first. She said women first become liberated when they can read a map, and she was a huge advocate of being able to navigate. So women have to be able to plot out a route on a map. Once you can plot out a route on a map, all by yourself without asking a man, then that is one of the first steps in freeing yourself and becoming a sort of a more liberated woman. Nan Shepherd said sort of similar things, not with the same feminist tone, but she says similar things about walking in Scotland. She said, you know, you've got to be, you and only you are responsible for your safety. You cannot blame anyone else, and it's all down to you. So you must know how to navigate. You must know how to read a compass. You must know how to read a map. You know, you must know a little some of the basics of being out in the wilderness. So that was a really important place to start. Although I have to say, some of the women whose journeys I followed, I think they just sort of set off. They didn't necessarily, I don't think they always went with compasses. So river journeys were quite popular, and coastal routes, because as a woman who's feeling slightly, I suppose, unsure of your own ability to navigate or concerned about getting lost, following a river or following a coastal path is a very easy way. It's a really good first step. It's not quite so difficult to get lost. And also, if you follow a river from its source, you're going downhill. So that was also sort of slightly less demanding. So one of the women I looked at, she did a river journey. She was 67, and she followed the Rhone from its first trickle right out to in Switzerland, right out to the south of France. And I thought it was a great walk for a 67-year-old to do. I don't know how relevant it is, but obviously, you know, navigation skills and map reading, and that part of the brain has been linked quite recently to Alzheimer's and dementia, which again is something that afflicts many, many more women than men. So I see navigating and learning to map read, I see it as, you know, something else that the women need to be doing to ensure that we stay mentally as fit and healthy as possible. So put away the phone and get out a proper map. Learn to follow those contours is what I would say.
Yeah, that's absolutely fascinating. I didn't even know that women were more prone to Alzheimer's than men. And then talking about, you know, the walks that you were going on, you know, following in the footsteps, you know, trying to get the same time of year, using your old map, your paper maps. What was the biggest challenge that you faced while you were out on these walks?
Do you know, for me, it was doing them on my own. So my big sort of revelation from doing this was, you know, how wonderful it is to be able to walk on your own without feeling afraid. And I had assumed, I think rightly, actually I think I had assumed wrongly that, you know, going out and hiking on your own, I had been frightened of that. I'd always wanted to do it, and I'd always been too frightened. All the way through, you know, growing up, I would always make a boyfriend come with me, because I did lots of hiking all the way through. I spent 3 months hiking through the Himalayas when I was about 21, and, you know, in the way far north of the Himalayas where no one else goes. But again, you know, I went with a boyfriend, And I nearly always had taken someone with me, or of course, latterly, my whole family had come. So I'd always done these long distance walks with other people, and I had never done it on my own. And so many of the women that I was researching went off on their own, and they walked at night on their own. They walked through, quite dangerous landscapes on their own. As I said earlier, they walked without any of the technology that we have. So they were really more at risk, I think, than we are today. I thought, okay, I'm going to have to do it on my own. I'm going to have to walk 10 days, day after day on my own. And I was nervous about that. I thought, what happens? Because again, these aren't 10 days walking through cities where there are lots of people. These are 10 days walking through areas where you don't really see many people. So I thought, what happens if I break an ankle? What happens if I, fall in the river? What could happen? What happens if I get assaulted? All these things that women walk with. And this is one of the things I look at in quite a lot of detail in my book is how much complexity women walk with. A man just thinks, oh, do you know what? I fancy an adventure. He puts on his backpack and off he goes. Now, it's so much more complicated for a woman, particularly in the past, but even today, I think, we think, okay, how much can I carry? For starters, because we're not always as strong. We then think, am I going to be safe? Is this route safe? We might even sort of Google, have there been many rapes on this route? Again, men never worry about that. We also have to think about, your period starting, cramps, and you have to take things on and think, well, okay, how am I going to handle that? You have to think about, am I going to arrive somewhere at night before it's dark? How long is that route? So, there's just so much additional complexity, even as we're thinking, God, can I navigate over that mountain, just with a map? And, when you read accounts of the famous male walkers, and there are many, many accounts of people like Robert Louis Stevenson and Laurie Lee, and they just set off. They just set off with a few raisins and a knife or a gun, and off they go. And they don't have any of this, I think, sort of mental baggage that we have to deal with before, that's before we go. And so for me, doing these walks, I was very acutely aware that I was by myself. And that was a new thing for me. And when I got back, a lot of my friends, their first questions were, did you meet dodgy men? Were you lonely? Did you miss your family? So there were a lot of sort of expectations on us, I think. It felt quite strange to come back and say, actually, I didn't miss my family at all. I had a wonderful time, because that feels slightly disloyal. But I thought, I'm going to be honest about this. And I wasn't lonely at all. And I absolutely loved it, because when you walk on your own, and you probably know this, Sarah, there's a big difference between walking on your own and walking with one friend and walking with a group. They're all very different experiences. And, I love walking with a friend, and sometimes I love walking in a group. But I didn't know if I was going to love walking on my own. I thought I might not. I thought I might be, I might be either bored or I might be scared. And I was a bit scared, but I was never, ever bored. And that was a revelation. That's probably the biggest thing I learned, was that when you walk on your own, the landscape is a very different place. And you engage more deeply, I think, with the wildlife, but partly because you're just much quieter. So walking with a bunch of kids, you never see any wildlife. You engage with the landscape differently. You look around more, because you're not having to make conversation or think about conversation or think about anyone else or make decisions about sort of conversations that you would have with a walking group or a walking partner is, where do we turn here? Should we go that way? Should we stop for lunch now or should we stop later? All those little decisions, you just don't have to think about them. So it takes away a whole layer of stuff to think about. It's all just taken away. And you're just walking with the landscape, and you're walking with the river, or you're walking with the mountain. And it means that you develop, I felt, you develop a completely new awareness of the landscape. And it's quite interesting, because at least two of the women I write about, they finish up their lives. They're single at the end of their lives, and they say their most important relationship has been with a mountain. Not with a man or a woman or their kids or anything. Actually, those two didn't have kids. But, that was the defining relationship of their life, was with a mountain. And so it might sound slightly strange, but I really started to understand that. And I think women who have walked on their own, for, day after day after day, that will resonate. It's a very different experience, and I would really recommend it. So that was for me the big hurdle bigger than, the other things you can prepare for. So the backpack, I was just doing lots of weightlifting, and I was doing, lots of physical exercise. That's quite straightforward. But preparing for things in your head is much more complicated, and you can't really do it. Apart from perhaps taking a few, I started taking walks on my own. I used to always walk my dog, and then my dog died, and I thought, okay, I could get another dog. But I thought, see if you can do this on your own. And I was quite amazed at countries where I walked on my own, and people stopped me all the time to say, are you on your own? And people were surprised by this. And I was like, yes, I'm on my own. And a lot of people were like, but why? Don't you have any friends? Or why are you on your own? So particularly in France, I got a lot of questions, why are you on your own? But people just thought, one man, for example, again, I write about this, but one man was like, well, you must be, you divorced, obviously. So I said, no, I actually, I have a husband. And he was like, well, where is he? I said, well, he's at home. He doesn't come everywhere I go. And he was really surprised by that. And in fact, in the end, in some countries, I started to say, because people were so surprised, I got all these questions, and I thought, I'm just a bit tired of answering these questions about why I'm on my own, and it's not because I'm weird, and it's not because I'm divorced, or it's not because I've got no friends. I started to say, I'm on a sort of pilgrimage. And in a way I was on a sort of pilgrimage. I was sort of in a pilgrimage in the footsteps of these women. But people were always much happier when I would say, oh, je suis pilgrim. And they were like, okay. Because there's a very, very long history of women doing pilgrimages, often on their own. So there was a sense of, that sort of made sense, whereas a woman walking around on her own with a backpack often didn't make sense, which I think is starting to change, but mainly on the trail. So if you do a sort of a well-known trail, people are much more used to seeing a woman on her own. But if you are just sort of walking around or following a river and it's not a famous big trail, then you really don't see many women walking on their own still. Yeah. And I hope that starts to change. And obviously with some of the news recently about women being attacked, I really worry that is going to sort of set us back again, because every time that happens, and we all feel it, I feel it, I think, oh God, perhaps I shouldn't be doing this, perhaps it's dangerous. And women have worked so hard over the last century, particularly over the last century, to fight these fears and to try and reclaim these wild places. And I want that to continue. We need to see more women out there walking, either on their own or with another woman. Because that is how we will all start to feel safer out there. And I'd love it to be a stage where any woman can just think, oh, I've got a weekend free. I'm just going to put on a backpack and I'm just going to, maybe I'll follow this river, or maybe I'll go and do that coastal path, or maybe I'll go into the mountains. But I think, and I don't know what you think, Sarah, but my feeling is that there are still only quite a small number of women who would feel comfortable doing that. What do you think?
I think you've hit the nail on the head. I think there's so many added complexities about women when they walk and hike, and everything that you listed is stuff that I know that I do in terms of the planning and the preparation and figuring out, well, how would I get there? Am I safe? What time of day would I arrive? What time do I need to start? What time do I need to finish? There's things that sort of men just do not need to even consider or think about. I know when I look at doing certain trails, safety is one of my paramount concerns, because I'm also very aware that it's my responsibility to look after myself when I put myself in these situations. And I was having a conversation with somebody recently, and I was telling him about a couple of the hikes I wanted to do. UK hikes, like, for example, heading down to do the South Downs Way, 100-mile national trail in the UK. And he was like, oh, you do it by yourself? I don't think he necessarily knew some of the trails I'd done. And I was sort of like, yes. And then it was that whole, are you not scared? Are you not fearful? And to be fair, like, part of me I wanted to have a real rant, but I realised that it was nothing to do with him. It was more a case of me just sort of thinking, yes, I'm feeling scared, but I shouldn't feel scared, because if men didn't attack women, then women would have this freedom to travel, and the responsibility of our safety is always on women. Like, women don't go out at night, women don't walk here, don't go there, don't do this, and it limits our freedom, and I'm raging. Anyway, but no, I think that the fact is it's very valid, very, very valid points about it. And I think there are smaller sections of the population who, and it's maybe not even about confidence or having the skills or the mindset, but it is, it's stepping outside your comfort zone. And it also depends on your upbringing, on your privilege, whether or not you had access to things like Duke of Edinburgh Award, how close you are to the mountains, how comfortable you feel in the outdoors, and the colour of your skin as well. As a white woman, I know that I'm afforded more privilege than black women and brown women who head out into the mountains. And so I think there's all of these things to take on board. And I think one of the interesting things you talked about it, when you go solo, one of the things that I personally enjoyed for me when I was on the Appalachian Trail was this amazing quality thinking time to really, to try to do some like deep reflection and really deep work within myself. But I also think that thinking time and being alone with your own thoughts, as empowering as it can also be very scary, because sometimes you don't want to reflect on things that have happened in your past and analyze what's gone on, no matter whether that's, you don't want to rate like different levels of trauma, but to actually think, reflect, process. And sometimes people aren't necessarily ready for that, and that can be very intimidating, to be in a wild open space alone with thoughts which can be very dark.
That's right, with yourself.
Yeah.
So true. That's very, very true. But I think also the other side of that coin is that sometimes you need to be with those parts of yourself, don't you? And you need that reflection time. So after my dad died, I did quite a lot of bits of the South Downs Way, actually, which I really recommend. And do you know what, Sarah? You always feel safe, nearly always feel safe on the South Downs. And one of the things I discovered with following in the footsteps of these women was that actually they chose their landscapes quite carefully. So somewhere like the South Downs, it's very open and it's quite exposed. So you can see someone coming towards you from quite a long way away. It's very, very unlike walking in a forest, for instance. And one of the walks I did was I went to Texas. So Georgia O'Keeffe, the artist, she started walking around on the Texas plains. And I've never been to Texas. I've never walked anywhere that was as vast as that grey, open, wild space. And I was quite nervous about that, because there's nothing there. There's no trees, there's no hedges. It's not like England or Europe at all. It's not even sort of mountain. I mean, it's not even like the mountains it's bleak, but it's just flat and sky. And she went out and walked at night. And I was like, wow, gosh, that's so brave. She'd gone these long night hikes on her own. And I thought, well, I'm going to have to do that for the sake of authenticity. I've got to do that. And I arrived in Texas, and it was just like no landscape I'd ever been in. And I thought, okay, I've just got to do it. I've got to do it. So I fortunately had terrible jet lag. So I would go out on the plains in the night because I couldn't sleep. And I felt so completely safe there. It was a sort of a revelation, really, how safe I felt. And I realized, and she kept writing in all her letters, she kept saying, I feel completely safe here because there's nothing here. There's nothing here. I can see a change of weather 5 days before it arrives. And it's true. You can just see for miles and miles and miles. And because there is nothing there, you feel really safe. You can also hear the sounds, travel across this sort of flat landscape, and you can hear them from such a long way away, and you can tell it's a long way away because it's quite quiet, and you can our ears just seem to be able to recognize whether something is close or a long way away. So again, you feel safe because you hear the coyote, and you know that's coming from quite a long, several miles away, so you don't feel that it's sort of snapping at your heels. And the other women, I think, also would choose very open landscapes. And there was only one woman who sort of liked walking in forests. And even she didn't do that very often. But one of my challenges I set myself was to try and walk. I was staying in France, to try and walk in French forests where she had walked, and to do it at night. Well, not at night, but certainly as it was getting dark. I didn't go out at midnight, but I think it was November, so it was quite dark. I was walking about 6 or 7. And it took me quite a long time to get used to that. And I was absolutely terrified. Because there's something about forests. There's something about forests, going back to female safety, is you can't see. you don't know, you can't see anything. You don't know who's behind a tree. But on the South Downs, especially up in the Cairngorms where I walked in Nan Shepherd's footsteps, it's very, very open. And I always felt safer in that open landscape than in, little twisty paths and lots of trees and valleys and woods. So again, I would probably, I would say, I think most of these women sort of knew that. They knew what landscapes to walk in instinctively.
Yeah. I do remember when I was on the Appalachian Trail and I was having to do some night hiking, and towards the end, I hated it towards the end, especially because I was following these white blazes, and I was walking through this very dense forest where there was white blazes on the trees, and I thought I was focusing and concentrating, but everything is so different in the dark. And I remember I lost the blaze. And I had to stop, and I was looking around with my pathetic headlight of a torch, or like using my iPhone torch, and I couldn't see a blaze anywhere. And I was literally like, oh my God, have I just walked off the path? Am I now stranded? And it was one of those ones where it's like, right, deep breaths, slow down, turn around. It's like pine needly forest, walk back, keep walking back 10 steps, look, find a blaze, like find any white mark on a tree. Found one blaze, had to stop at that blaze, then find the next blaze and be like, okay, right, you can walk the 10 meters to that one to get myself out of that forest. And like, I could feel my stress rising because, it's the pressure. Like, I was under a lot of time pressure because this was like the day, I think this was like day 98 or day 99. I'd already walked like 30 odd miles that day. And so it was like, it's late, it's tired, I'm physically exhausted, and I don't want to make a mistake, because I don't want to redo any of my steps. But one thing that I found interesting is definitely after the Appalachian Trail, I started to feel a lot more claustrophobic, when I was just being surrounded by trees all the time. I actually craved open outdoor space where I could see more. And it's definitely something that influenced me for a couple of years in terms of what I chose to do, and in terms of not being in a green tunnel or not being in forest or being covered up. I definitely needed that open space. I mean, when did you finish writing the book?
Well, I finished doing the walking literally a week before lockdown, thank God, because I'd had to travel all over the place. And then I finished writing it about August or September, autumn last year. I was sort of doing the final edits to it.
I mean, reflecting back now on the book, which I think is just incredible what you've done with Windswept. I think, women's stories are just so important to be shared, whether through audio or through film or through the written word. It's so, so powerful. Reflecting back on Windswept and, walking the footsteps of remarkable women, what do you think's been the biggest sort of lesson for you, the biggest takeaway?
I think that one of the problems for women is that we haven't had a legacy. We haven't been able to look back and think, oh gosh, women have been doing this for years, so therefore I can. We have always felt as though we are pioneers and having to go first, but actually because these women have been erased from history, completely wiped out. And I think it's hugely empowering. I think if I had known maybe 30 or 40 years ago, when I was, actually it wasn't that long ago, it was about 30 years ago, when I was really, I'd been through a really tough time, and I really desperately wanted to walk on my own to reflect really, and to sort of try and understand, what had happened, and to work out where to go next. It was one of those sort of early 20s crises. And that was a stage when I had to take the boyfriend with me because I was too scared to go on my own. But I think if I had known that all of these women before me, hundreds of years before me, had gone off, just taken off and walked through the Pyrenees and walked over the Himalayas and, climbed mountains, and if I had known about them, I would perhaps have found, I like to think I would have found the courage to do it, to do something on my own. But because all the books were about men climbing mountains and men walking across Europe and men, doing these great trails, you start to learn, don't you, that this is something that men do. And you start to learn that this is not your place. Those messages are just going in very, very softly, very, very discreetly. Not your place, not your thing. Got to take a man with you. And I think that I would, instead of, finding the courage, sort of halfway through my life, I would have found the courage, like you have, Sarah, sort of much earlier on. And I could have packed in many more years of adventure, of just feeling freer and having more adventures. So I guess my takeaway is that we have to resurrect all of these women, and it's happening quite a lot with mountaineering, as I'm sure you know. There are, I know it was great hearing about Nellie Bly. So we're starting to learn more about these women, but there are still so many more who've been completely forgotten, and I think they need to be pulled out of the woodwork. And I look at several of them, but there's a lot more work to be done. I know there are a lot of women now doing this and also writing away, and there'll be many more books coming out. And I know, I heard your podcast on Wanderers. Kerry Andrews has done a great job, but there are many more women, and we just need to start recognizing them, putting them back on the stage. And, all that literature of the leg, as it's called, which is about male adventures, male hiking adventures, just needs to be rewritten. They need to take out half the men and replace them. Now that we know who these women are, there needs to be a balance so that every woman reading about the history of women walking sees that women have always found the courage and the audacity to do it, and therefore that gives us permission to do it.
Legacy is so powerful because it almost makes me upset that these are the thoughts that you've been having, and I think back to even in my early 30s that I just didn't know. Like I just did that. It's that constant subliminal messaging with, through history, through the books that you see, through the films that you watch, through who gets exposure on the mainstream media, who you hear on the radio, who gets the films made about them, who gets their stories shared, which voices are propelled forward, which ones are silenced, which ones are ignored, which ones are hidden. And I just keep thinking, I just want to do so much more, like just more voices, more stories. And like you say, there's so many more women doing this now, whether it's through their blogging, through sharing on their social media, through starting podcasts. And it's all so powerful because it needs this roar or this upswell of voices, because I just don't want my little niece, who's like 5 years old at the moment, to turn 20 or 30 and to be in a similar situation to me and not knowing. Like I want her growing up being surrounded by this, and not just her but other little girls and little boys who are growing up. It's like the legacy has to change. And Annabel, where's the best place for people to find more information about you, to find out more about your books, the writing that you do? I know you also do like essays and articles, and fingers crossed also, future events. Where should they find you?
Oh, well, I have a website, which is www.annabelabs.com, or you can just sort of Google. I know I'm on Instagram and Twitter and Facebook, or you can just Google Windswept, and hopefully the details of the book and events will crop up, I hope.
Annabel, thank you so much for coming on the Tough Girl podcast and sharing more about the work that you're doing, more about your walking and Windswept. And I'd love for you to have the final words of advice, final advice for women out there who, to be honest, want to get windswept, want to have the wind blowing in their hair. They want to have that freedom to go and hike solo. What would be your advice? What would be your top tips?
Learn to read a map if you don't, and not everyone has done. I didn't do Duke of Edinburgh. Not everyone has done Duke of Edinburgh. So learn to read a map, learn to navigate. You can do really straightforward courses, or follow a river or a coast, and just start by doing like a full day. Maybe trying to do sort of, 15. Maybe start by doing one day, 15 miles on your own, where you just walk all day and then take it from there. But please don't be frightened. It's really mainly pretty safe out there in the wilds.
I think the key thing you just said there is start by doing. because that is the only way that you can start, is by actually taking that first step. So start by doing. So Annabel, thank you so much for coming on the Tough Girl podcast and sharing more about your life and your journey and what you've been doing. I really do appreciate everything that you've put into Windswept, and I hope the women and men listening will buy copies of your book, read it, share it, promote it, and encourage more women to get out there and to experience this wonderful world that we live in.
Thank you, Sarah. And I think you're doing a fantastic job too. So keep going. It's you're making the new legacy. You really are. It's so important.
Hey tribe, I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Annabel. What a conversation, what a woman, what a book, and what a passion for writing about women who enjoy walking and spending time in the outdoors. So if you're brand new to the Tough Girl podcast, my name is Sarah Williams. I'm the host of the Tough Girl podcast and the founder of Tough Girl Challenges, which is all about motivating and inspiring you while also increasing the amount of female role models in the media. So everything that we have talked about today will be available in the show notes at toughgirlchallenges.com. So please do go and check it out. Now, I just want to highlight a few other episodes which I think would add a lot of value, especially if you're interested in walking and historic women figures. So one of the women that Annabel talked about was Dr. Kerry Andrews, who is the author of Wanderers, A History of Women Walking. So we spoke to Dr. Kerry Andrews on November 5th, 2020, and Kerry is a senior lecturer in English literature at Edge Hill University. She writes about literary history, particularly untold or forgotten histories, and has published widely on women's writing. She's traced the footsteps of 10 women walkers, from an 18th century parson's daughter, Elizabeth Carter, who desired nothing more than to be taken for a vagabond in the wilds of southern England, to modern walker writers such as Nan Shepherd and Cheryl Strayed. Wanderers offers a beguiling alternative view of the history of walking, so well worth checking out. A future episode that we have coming out on December 2nd is with Rosemary J. Brown, who is a London-based journalist and author. She's an avid traveller, she's a fellow of the Royal Geographical Society and a Churchill Fellow. Her quest has been to put female adventurers back on the map. She's spoken at the Globetrotters Club, Women of the World's Festival, Women's Institutes and Schools. She's helped to organise the first Heritage of Women in Exploration conference at the Royal Geographical Society. And recently, her most recent book is Following Nellie Bly. Rosemary shares more about that adventure, shares more about Nellie, and it's an absolutely fascinating interview. So that episode's coming out on December 2nd. A few weeks ago, we spoke with Elise Wortley, who is from Women with Altitude, her website womenwithaltitude.com, and what she does is brings to life the incredible lost histories of female adventurers by literally walking in their footsteps using only what was available to them at the time. So, similar to what we've talked about today, throughout history, female adventurers have been overshadowed by their male counterparts. The projects that Elise has been working on highlights these groundbreaking women's stories and achievements with the hope to inspire women and girls today. So it's, again, a truly, truly fascinating episode, especially when she recreates their journey wearing the old clothes. We find out how she got their equipment, the research that she did, and also doing these adventures and challenges with no modern expedition equipment whatsoever. So she's recreated 2 journeys so far, and she is planning the 3rd. Again, absolutely fascinating. And that episode came out on the 4th of November. So yeah, to be honest, all of the episodes of the Tough Girl podcast are fascinating and inspiring. So please do go and check them out. There's over 450 episodes in the back catalogue. So if you are completely brand new, then oh my goodness, get listening. Make sure you hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out. Going forward, there are going to be regular episodes coming out on a Tuesday and Thursday at 7 a.m. UK time. So a massive thank you to everybody who has been listening. I really do appreciate your support, and a massive thank you to everyone who's signed up as a patron. So Annabel Abbs, who I just spoke with, really believed in the mission and what I'm doing and about creating this, this legacy that we talked about at the end. And she signed up as a patron after our conversation, which was just so, so awesome. It's always amazing to have people believe in you and then to follow it up with action. So if you'd like to support the Tough Girl podcast, to support the mission to increase the amount of female role models in the media, then please do go and visit Patreon, patreon.com/Tough Girl podcast. and you can sign up. There's a whole variety of different tiers. There is a monthly option. There's also an annual option. Don't worry about the currency, because you can support in sterling, US dollars, euros, Australian dollars. Your currency will be there. So please do go check out patreon.com. But many thanks again for taking the time out to listen to the Tough Girl podcast. I really do appreciate it. If you could tell one friend about it, I would be very, very grateful. But wherever you are, whatever you are doing, give it your all, give it 110%, get after it, go for it, believe in yourself, because I believe in you. Take care, lots of love, and I will speak to you soon. Bye.